Hi, I'm Steve and welcome to my kitchen. I was so thrilled with the rosemary bread served as an appetizer at Romano's Macaroni Bar and Grill that I developed my own no-knead rosemary bread recipe.
I like to give each guest their own loaf so they can use their hands to tear off a piece and dip it in the olive oil. It's the perfect appetizer. And the perfect complement to our smart and easy spaghetti and meatballs. What's more, the homemade, fresh from the oven bread will have everyone thinking I spent hours on the meatballs and pasta sauce.
Making no-knead rosemary bread is as easy as making a bowl of Campbell's soup. I heard what you were thinking. But think about it. If you're going to make a bowl of Campbell's soup, you have to stir it. If you're going to make no-knead bread, you have to stir it. But if you make no-knead bread, you don't even have to open a can. How simple is that? I set up my workspace with my utensils and my ingredients.
I'll be using 3 cups flour, 1½ teaspoons salt, 1/4 teaspoon instant yeast, 1 tablespoon sugar, 1 tablespoon dried rosemary, 1 tablespoon extra virgin olive oil, and 13 ounces of water. Prior to combining the dry ingredients, I used a mortar and pestle to grind the dry rosemary into smaller bits and to bring out its flavor. I'm going to start with the dry ingredients. 3 cups flour. I use the scoop and shake method for measuring flour. I like bread flour, but it's perfectly acceptable to use all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour contains 12% gluten, and bread flour has 14% gluten. While bread flour may, as the package says, be better for bread, either is acceptable. Next, 1½ teaspoons salt. I use everyday table salt. There are a number of no-knead recipes in which the salt varies from 1 to 2 teaspoons, depending upon your diet. I use a heaping teaspoon to get my 1.5 teaspoons. And 1/4 teaspoon instant yeast, sometimes referred to as bread machine yeast. Next, we'll add the dry flavor ingredients, 1 tablespoon sugar and 1 tablespoon dried rosemary. Before we add the wet ingredients, I'm going to mix the dry ingredients to ensure that they are evenly distributed throughout the flour. And it's time for the wet ingredients. 1 tablespoon extra virgin olive oil and 13 ounces cool tap water. Next, we'll combine the wet and dry ingredients. This is the hardest part of making the dough, but it takes less than 1 minute. It probably looks silly for me to be using the handle end of a spoon, but I've tried a number of tools, and there are times that I think the handle end of a spoon is the easiest. Note how the dough is beginning to stick to the bowl. It means the ingredients are blended.
All we need to do now is cover the bowl with plastic wrap and leave it on the counter to proof. And Mother Nature will do the kneading for us. I'll see you in 8 hours.
No-knead dough should be proof for 8 to 18 hours, which gives you a lot of flexibility. You can make the dough in the morning and bake it for your evening meal, or you can make the dough in the evening, bake the next morning, and have oven-fresh bread for your lunch.
The dough is proofed 8 hours and more than tripled in size. It's time to fold, shape, and proof the dough a second time.
Before we start, I would like to make a point. If my goal were to copy Romano's rosemary bread, I would divide the dough in half and make 2 loaves. But my goal is not to copy the rosemary bread. My goal is to create a similar dining experience, and I like to give each guest their own individual loaf. So, if I have 4 guests, I divide the dough into quarters. If I have 6 guests, I divide the dough into sixths. If I have 8 guests, I make 2 batches. In this video, I'm going to be making 6 individual serving loaves using 2 methods. I'll bake 3 in this Sassafras Superstone Baker. That's for those of you who like the traditional no-knead method of baking in a Dutch oven. And 3 using parchment paper on a baking stone. That's for those of you who don't have a clay baker. First, I'll dust the workspace with flour and scrape the dough out of the bowl. Its stringy nature tells us Mother Nature has done her job. With floured hands, I'm going to lightly pat the dough to flatten and spread. Then using a plastic bowl scraper, I'll fold the dough over onto itself, forming a ball. That's all you need to do. Next, I'll divide the dough into portions. I'll cut the dough into thirds, then cut each in half, form a ball, and place the dough ball on the parchment paper. I cut 3 strips of parchment paper 5 inches wide, the width of the baker, and 8 inches long. You'll see why when I put them into the baker. The loaves I'm going to bake on the baking stone will all be on 1 sheet of parchment paper. And they're ready to proof. I've placed the dough on the parchment paper and covered them with a flour sack towel to proof. Before I leave the kitchen, I'll prep the oven. I've positioned the rack to the lower part of the oven and inserted a baking stone and the clay baker. I do it in advance so I don't forget. I want to proof the dough for 1 to 2 hours, so I'll set the timer for 1 hour to start preheating the oven. It's been 1 hour and I'm setting the oven to 450 degrees. Clay bakers come to temperature faster than cast iron Dutch ovens, so I can start baking as soon as the oven comes to temperature.
The dough has been proofing over an hour, and the oven has come to temperature. It's time to bake the bread.
I'm going to start by brushing the tops of the loaves with a little olive oil, and I'll garnish them with a sprinkle of coarse salt. You could add a little rosemary also if you wanted to. The olive oil is like an egg wash. The moist surface will allow the salt to adhere to the dough, and it will give the bread a light brown appearance when it's baked. Next, I'll score the dough with the scissors. I'll start by putting the 3 demi-loaves into the sassafras baker. All you need to do is use the parchment paper as a sling and place them side by side in the baker. Note that the parchment paper is the width of the baker, and it will keep the loaves separated during oven rise. Oh well, as you can see, I should have put the 2 end ones in first. The baker is ready for the oven. And I'll slide the pizza paddle under the parchment paper and slide it into the oven on the baking stone. Now that was easy. The loaves on the baking stone will bake faster than the loaves in the baker, so I'll be using 2 timers, 15 minutes for the baking stone and 25 minutes for those in the baker. I took the loaves that were baked on the parchment paper out of the oven after 15 minutes, and it's time to take the baker out of the oven. The loaves from the baking stone and the baker are very similar. A slight difference in shape and crust. I think the baker gives the loaves a little better crust, but you can only bake 3 at a time. Well, what do you think? They look great and they taste great. I like to give each guest their own loaf so they can use their hands to tear off a piece and dip it in olive oil. So before serving, I like to give my guests a choice of straight olive oil, or a splash of balsamic vinegar, or fresh ground black pepper, or my favorite, Montreal steak seasoning. And I love to serve it with my smart and easy spaghetti and meatballs. If you want to see just how easy they are to make, check them out on my YouTube channel. I have a variety of videos demonstrating no-knead breads and smart and easy meals. You may want to take a look at my YouTube channel. It's free. Just click on the Artisan Bread with Steve tab above this screen.